Alright, so I just finished Dune Prophecy, and in this video I'm going to give a full breakdown of the episode in which I make note of all the major changes from the Schools of Dune trilogy of books it is based on. It is important to note that only Valya's flashback scenes are taken from the books. The present timeline in the show is completely new material, aside from a few returning characters, so during the breakdown I will only spoil stuff that is relevant to this episode. At the end of the video, I may do a bit of speculating about the future of the show, but you don't have to worry, I will warn you before spoiling anything beyond this episode, so let's get into it. The show opens with some creepy whispering voices saying, "Victory is celebrated in the light, but it is won in the darkness." This doesn't seem to be a quote from any of the books, but I think it is meant to set up the show's moral ambiguity. We then get Valya giving us some much needed exposition. She tells us how enslaved humans rebelled against the thinking machines and that her great-grandfather was labeled a traitor, whilst Atreides led humanity to victory. You can tell by the way Valya says this that she doesn't believe it. So let me quickly explain what she is actually referring to. In the beginnings of the Dune timeline, humanity continues evolving its technology, and a group of 20 humans immortalize themselves by becoming what is known as a Psymech. This is a process in which the brain is removed from the human body and placed into a canister that can then be swapped into different robotic forms. These 20 titans ruled the known universe until one of them, Xerxes, grew lax and inadvertently allowed an AI Evermind known as Omnius to take control. Humanity eventually rebels and overthrows the thinking machines, ending their enslavement at the Battle of Corran. In this battle, Valya Harkonnen is unwilling to risk sacrificing the 2 million innocent lives necessary to end the war and actively impedes it, and so is labeled a traitor. Vorian Atreides is credited as victor, while House Harkonnen is banished to the planet Lankavel, thus starting an extremely long-standing feud between the two houses. The name Corrino originates from the Battle of Corran. This conflict between the thinking machines is known as the Butlerian Jihad, and this term will be relevant again later in the breakdown. Keep in mind that in this show the term is not used, instead the event is just referred to as the Machine War. So, Valya's anger and character motivation seem to be consistent in the show and books. Her entire character is driven by the status of her household and her belief that it is a lie, and her desire to restore her house to its former glory. Valya then mentions Raquella Berto Anarol, who all you really need to know right now is that through a series of incidents, became the first ever Reverend Mother and formed the Sisterhood School. In the show, it mentions how Raquella trained and sent out a bunch of truthsayers to govern the Imperium, which is one of my issues with the show, which becomes more prevalent as the episode continues. The Sisterhood's implantation and machinations to put a sister on the throne feels a bit obvious, but for some reason it's treated like some super secret plan that's been in development for decades. Empress Natalya and Desmond Hart seem to be the only ones with 2 brain cells to really see what's going on. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. Valya next talks about the beginnings of the breeding program and how Raquella wishes to essentially breed better leaders that the Sisterhood can also manipulate. There is then a line saying how zealots among them would view this breeding as heresy, and the camera focuses on Sister Dorothea. So to explain this, we need to go back to that term, the Butlerian Jihad, which if you've forgotten already, is the overthrowing of the thinking machines. So after that event, a division formed among the people. One group, known as the Butlerians, were anti-technology and eventually developed the commandment that thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind. The other group, labeled machine sympathizers, were more open to technological advancements. In the books, Sister Dorothea is very much a Butlerian fanatic, and the Sisterhood keeps their breeding records on secret computers. So from what I remember, the issue wasn't so much the concept of the breeding program, it was the technology used to contain it that Dorothea had issues with. Valya finally finishes her monologue, and we are greeted with our first official flashback scene. I was a bit surprised we got this scene specifically so early on. I actually thought this scene, which takes place pretty late in the trilogy, would be shown during the finale of this season, not the very first episode. Anyway, this scene is quite different than its book counterpart, but does something interesting in which maybe tries to tie more directly into Frank Herbert's original Dune saga. So we have a lot to unpack. In the show version, Raquella is dying and calls for Valya. This annoys Dorothea, and Raquella utters a prophecy before passing away. It goes as follows: Red dust, it's coming. Turan Arafel. Valya, grow us, safeguard our power. Use every tool, the Sisterhood must be strengthened or it will fall. You will be the one to see the burning truth and know. So Valya takes these prophetic words to heart in the show, and by the end of the episode, it's pretty obvious what the burning truth is. But Turan Arafel, now that word, Arafel, first appears in Frank Herbert's fourth book, God Emperor of Dune. It means cloud darkness of holy judgment, so essentially an apocalyptic event, end of the universe type shit. Now in the show, Valya, talking to her close sisters, basically says as much, but more specifically, she makes it sound like it's a holy judgment brought on by a tyrannical leader and will happen soonish. This is why she wants to stop it by putting a sister on the throne. So I'm not sure it's referring to the same thing that the God Emperor is in the fourth book. Young Kasha warns Valya that Dorothea will never agree to allowing a sister to be the first empress of the known universe. Valya monologues again and mentions that Raquella wanted the Sisterhood united. Valya feels the Sisterhood needs to be in order to stop this new threat and to utilize any tool necessary, which to me seems to be hinting at advanced technology. Right after this, Dorothea goes on a bit of a Butlerian tirade, saying how the mind of man is holy, and we see the division firsthand with both Valya and Dorothea having followers among the sisters. Valya claims that Raquella chose her to lead. The scene transitions to the confrontation between Valya and Dorothea. We see Dorothea looking to access the breeding index, presumably to destroy it and return the Sisterhood to its values. So in the show version, Dorothea seems to disagree with the core concept of the breeding program and this idea of ruling the Imperium rather than guiding it. She seems to be a bit more of a villain because she agrees with Raquella on her deathbed and then instantly goes against her wishes. Dorothea's followers are also once again referred to as zealots opposed to the in-universe Butlerian label. We do get the reveal that Raquella is Dorothea's grandmother. Dorothea doesn't listen to Valya's pleading, so Valya uses the voice on her and commands her to kill herself. Conveniently, the only witnesses to this event are Valya's close sisters, including Kasha and her actual younger sister Tula. Valya also reveals that she believes she is the first one to have used this voice power. Before killing Dorothea, Valya does offer her the chance to bend the knee to Valya's rule, and Dorothea refuses while also emphasizing Valya's disgraced Harkonnen name, which further villainizes Dorothea. So in the book, this whole event goes quite differently, although the outcome is the same. Raquella on her deathbed wishes for Valya and Dorothea to put aside their differences and lead together. However, she only shares her memories with Dorothea. So to quickly explain this, for those of you who don't know, when you become a Reverend Mother, you gain access to all your female ancestral memories. The process of sharing this with another is so that they have all of your up-to-date memories before you die. Valya is jealous that Raquella only shared with her granddaughter and not her as well. Valya then kills Dorothea right after Raquella passes, using the voice out of anger because she wants all the power to herself. No one witnesses the murder, and Tula isn't even on Wallach IX when it happens. There is no prophecy, and Valya becomes Mother Superior and is able to cover up the murder to the truthsayers by saying how just before Raquella died, she did something to Dorothea's mind, and so Dorothea became distraught, took up a knife, and stabbed herself. None of this was actually a lie, so Valya gets away with it. In the book version, Valya is much more deceitful, power-hungry, and willing to do anything to get what she wants. While Dorothea is not exactly a saint in the book, the show kind of flip-flopped who was more villainous in this scene. We then fade to black and text appears on the screen setting up the present timeline. 30 years after Raquella's death, 116 years after the end of the Great Machine Wars, 10,148 years before the birth of Paul Atreides is our current time frame. Still on the Sisterhood School on Wallach IX, we hear Sister Avila telling how more houses have put in requests for a truthsayer, and interestingly, Mother Superior Valya turns down the one for House Harkonnen for a 4th time. Next, we get a bit of heavy-handed exposition dialogue from some initiates telling us that Princess Ynez, heir to the Golden Lion throne, will soon be attending their school after her new marriage. We get our first look at Constantine, and the girls explain to us that this is Ynez's half-brother and that he has no claim to the throne. Valya meets with Constantine, and it is revealed that Ynez will spend the next 10 years at the Sisterhood School. Next, we see Tula teaching a lesson on truth-saying. It should be noted that the color of the sisters' robes reveals their rank within the Sisterhood. Black are full sisters and have presumably taken the drug to turn them into Reverend Mothers. Keep in mind that this process is different than the Water of Life spice drug that Lady Jessica takes on Arrakis to become a Reverend Mother, which is why their eyes are not that blue within blue. Gray robes indicate acolytes, and white robes indicates initiates. Valya interrupts and dismisses the class, informing Tula that Princess Ynez is theirs. Next, we get a beautiful transition shot and move over to Salusa Secundus, which is the home planet of House Carino. This is before the planet becomes a prison planet for the Emperor Sardaukar that we see in the newer Dune movies. We see a pulled back shot of the palace, and the full training scene between Princess Ynez and House Carino's new swordmaster Kieran Atreides that we kept seeing in the trailers. They are training with an active shield on, so remember that the slow blade is what penetrates through the shield. Faster motions will be deflected. There is quite a lot of sexual tension between the two that will be unleashed at the end of the episode. Constantine breaks the tension and jokes about how his half-sister will be marrying a very young boy. Kieran and Ynez continue their sparring, and we transition over to a meeting between the current Emperor of the known universe, Javicco Carino, accompanied by his truthsayer of many years, Kasha, who, if you remember, was one of Valya's close childhood friends on this show who saw her kill Dorothea. Take note that House Carino is the same house that Paul overthrows in Dune Part 2, meaning that House Carino has a 10,000-year dynasty before Paul disrupts it and becomes Emperor of the known universe himself. Now, Javicco Carino technically is not an original character, although in the book trilogy this is pulling from, he was just a young boy and only mentioned as being the son of Roderick Carino, brother of the then Emperor Salvador Carino. Salvador was a terrible ruler and met an unfortunate early death and had no heirs. So Roderick took up the throne, and it would appear that his son, Javicco, became emperor after him. Something to take note of is that Salvador and Roderick had a half-sister, Anna Carino, who actually went to train at the original Sisterhood School on Russak. I'd be a bit surprised if we don't see Anna in any of these upcoming flashbacks. Overall, training at the Sisterhood School did not go well for Anna, so it is somewhat surprising that Javicco is so willing to send his daughter, Princess Ynez, there, because I would have thought his father, Roderick, who hated the Sisterhood, would have instilled this same predisposition to his son. Obviously not, though, because we will soon see that Javicco is basically a neutered man without Kasha, his truthsayer. So, back to the meeting, which we see is with House Richeze. Real quick, let me give an overview of House Richeze. Paul Atreides' grandmother is Helena Richeze. This would be Leto's mother. House Richeze is very technology forward, pushing the boundaries similar to the Ixians. Both escaped a lot of the more severe ramifications of the Butlerian Jihad. Now back to the scene. Basically what's going on in this meeting is confirmation that Salvador is marrying his daughter, the Princess Ynez, to a son of House Richeze. And as a wedding present, will be receiving a fleet of ships that will assist the Emperor with the troubles he is having on Arrakis. Now later in the episode, we find out that the Emperor's trouble on Arrakis is also by manipulation of the Sisterhood. So you can kind of see how the Sisterhood operates. It creates the Arrakis problem, and also creates the solution to solve this by the Sisterhood suggesting Javicco marry his daughter to the young Richeze, killing two birds with one stone. This marriage is exactly what the Sisterhood wants, since Ynez has been under their thumb since childhood and will soon be trained in their ways. Now, I think it's quite obvious that the Emperor should have other options available to him to get ships to deal with his Arrakis troubles, but he is being led by the hand like a little boy by Kasha, his truthsayer. To me, this scene is a bit awkward because, as I've said before, it feels a bit obvious what's going on here, with the sisters just idly communicating with one another through hand talk. We also never even see Richeze confer with his truthsayer. I think maybe what's bothering me a little is that these house leaders are willingly relinquishing power to the truthsayers rather than treating them as their servants. If the show depicted the truthsayers as being less than the rulers, then I'd buy into it a bit more that the Sisterhood is able to achieve all this supposedly secret manipulating. Instead, it comes across at least a little that all these men are idiots and willing to give control to the Sisterhood, which maybe is what the show wants, I'm not sure. I think what I'm trying to get at is that the plans within plans of this show so far feel a little heavy-handed, which is a shame. Javicco ultimately agrees to the deal and even the extra request that Richeze be granted a wing in the palace. We then go back to Wallach IX and see some of what the Sisterhood training entails for both body and mind. Valya in the books is very violence forward and an extremely gifted fighter, so leaning into this physical training in the Sisterhood makes sense. Not super relevant, but I was amused during the training how one of the girls just decides to curb stomp the other. A concept directly pulled from the books is how they train their truth-saying sense by testing them on criminals who are also very skilled liars. Although I am unsure why the prisoners appear to be naked. Valya calls out Sister Jin, who is cocky during the truth-saying exercise, and has her share her backstory in which she claims she was sold to a man who peddled the flesh of children, of whom she murdered along with her parents. She laughs and says she is joking, but later it is revealed that some of this is true. Nothing wrong with the scene exactly, but it does kind of set an odd tone to the Sisterhood so early on in the episode. Next we transition back to Salusa Secundus, in which Empress Natalya is prepping Princess Ynez for her engagement party. The Empress attempts to instill some wisdom on her daughter unsuccessfully. Natalya warns that Ynez is being manipulated by the Sisterhood and that she is doing exactly what they want. Basically, Natalya and Desmond are the only two characters right now who don't have any wool pulled over their eyes. Ynez, we see, feels she is in control and wants to marry the young Richeze boy, believing it will give her more years of absolute power. I actually think the way this scene plays out makes it one of my favorite scenes of the episode. The mother-daughter dynamic is interesting and realistic, and the scene does a good job of subtly establishing a lot of information in a natural way. The scene transitions to Desmond Hart, another wholly original character who definitely has the most intrigue surrounding him. The Emperor is surprised that the man is alive and agrees to meet with him. It is revealed that Desmond has been through 12 tours on Arrakis. During this final tour, his entire group was wiped out, but somehow Desmond has returned from the dead, and based on his mannerisms, it instantly becomes apparent that something has changed within him. We then get our best execution of truth-saying so far, in my opinion, as Kasha informs the Emperor that Desmond is telling the truth when he says that it wasn't the Fremen that wiped out his group. It was insurgents from the Emperor's own allied worlds, smuggling the spice out. We've seen spice smuggling before. In Dune Part 2, we are reintroduced to Gurney Halleck after he joins up with a spice smuggling crew. Desmond requests he be given an assignment here at the palace, and the Emperor invites him to join them at his daughter's engagement party. As the Emperor leads Desmond away, the camera makes sure to show us that Desmond and Kasha make eye contact, and the creepy whispering overlaps this meeting of gazes. I bring this up because we don't know exactly how Desmond's abilities work, and at the end of the episode, Kasha burns alongside the Richeze boy. So this eye contact could be relevant. Right after this eye contact, we transition into the prophetic dream sequence that Kasha has that we've seen bits and pieces of in the trailers. So the sequence appears to be a warning about Ynez's upcoming marriage, and in it we see some gross imagery, a lot of blood, and Ynez accusing Kasha. As we'll soon find out, the bond between Ynez and Kasha is quite strong, so it's not surprising that Kasha would immediately take her leave to warn the Sisterhood of her vision. The vision also features some sandworm consumption, which is relevant later in the two flashing blue eyes, which to me still looks very machine-like. The blue eyes are very reminiscent of every thinking machine we've seen thus far, both in the flashback scene at the beginning and also with the toy salamander. So right after this, Kasha immediately tells Ynez goodbye, and we see that Ynez's relationship with Kasha is very mother-daughter-like, and much more intimate than Ynez's bond with her actual mother. We do get some very interesting dialogue about how when the Sisterhood found Ynez, Kasha refers to her as a child held captive for years. If this is to be taken literally, then I'm very intrigued about Ynez's childhood now. But it's also possible that Kasha simply means Ynez being in the palace and restrained to her duties, she possibly felt like a captive. The next scene is between Natalya and her husband, Javicco. Javicco informs Natalya that Kasha won't be able to attend Ynez's engagement party, and some snarky dialogue ensues from Natalya trying to make her husband realize that he's being manipulated by the Sisterhood. Javicco remains firm, feeling he has no other choice than to proceed. Natalya attempts one final time to persuade him that there was a time when he trusted her advice, and the Imperium was stronger for it. She says this whilst touching his hand, trying to save what's left of their marriage. And Javicco, like a savage, shuts her down by saying how they remember things differently. I have a feeling that may have been Javicco's last real chance to change the course of their marriage. Our next scene shows Valya and Tula going through their acolytes trying to decide who to pair Ynez with in order to keep her in line with their goals. I like the look of the device that they use throughout this episode for displaying information. Really, this scene seems to be a way for us, the audience, to be introduced to our main cast of acolytes on the show. They ultimately seem to agree to use Sister Theodosia for this purpose, who is apparently Valya's favorite, while Tula's favorite is Lila, who we find out is a natural-born empath, which is useful for truth-saying. But Valya critiques the child, calling her a lost lamb. I feel that their choice in favorites directly parallels their own personalities as children, with Tula being much softer and emotional but able to be manipulated by Valya, who is much more brash and strong-willed. And for reasons I won't reveal yet, Tula has a lot of regret in her own past, so perhaps she wishes to shelter the innocent child because her own innocence is long gone. Overall, the scene is a clever way to quickly give us information on the acolytes who are relevant to this show. I would like to note that Lila's lineage is also mentioned but not revealed, so perhaps she is descended from a relevant character. I also particularly like the line of dialogue Tula says to Valya about how, in time, she'll grow all those hard layers that you measure worth by, as I did. The scene does a clever transition into the arrival of Kasha, who reveals her vision. The full extent of the Sisterhood plan is also revealed. Like I mentioned earlier, the Sisterhood used Kasha to bond Ynez as a child, block the Empress's interference, guide the Emperor, all while weakening him on Arrakis. It is quite clear that Kasha does genuinely care for Ynez in this scene though, which is something to keep in mind. These are not the same Bene Gesserit that we see later on. This Sisterhood has not yet fully mastered their emotional control, although they are guiding the Sisterhood in that direction. But even 10,000 years later, the Sisterhood can slip up and follow their emotions, as Lady Jessica did in producing a boy, Paul, instead of a girl. One thing I do really like about this show so far is that it does a good job of showing us the plan within plans from every angle, rather than hiding it from us, which is something Frank Herbert did a lot in his books. He would clue the audience in on everything beforehand, and the excitement came from seeing how the other groups would react, rather than hiding it from the audience for a plot twist. Kasha proposes the idea that perhaps the Sisterhood is creating the very thing they are trying to prevent. Valya shuts this down, believing in her convictions and Raquella's words, and tells Kasha to stay the night and return to Salusa tomorrow. We can see that Tula is less convinced that they shouldn't pay more heed to Kasha's vision. Shortly after, in another scene, Tula argues a bit with her sister and encourages her to, at the very least, confirm the matching with Ynez in the breeding index. Which, unless I'm missing something, I'm confused as to why this wouldn't have already been done. The next scene is the engagement between Lord Pruitt Richeze, the 9-year-old boy, and Princess Ynez. we see that, like his father, Pruitt is a bit of a little shit. The scene that unfolds is meant to be a bit uncomfortable, and it really leans into it, with the father saying, "May the seeds of House Richese find purchase in royal wombs," referring to the eventual coupling of his son and Princess Ynez. The engagement proceeds uncomfortably, and Pruitt continues being a brat throughout. The after party is interrupted by Pruitt's accidental release of his robotic toy salamander, which causes a huge scene and shows us the genuine fear people have about advanced technology. House Richese, as I've mentioned earlier, is much more open with technology, although such a blatant showing of technology, as far as I'm aware, is also grounds for execution, which I think is hinted toward in the show. At least before the Emperor let it all slide, as Empress Natalya accuses the boy, and Princess Ynez protectively puts her arm out. Not because she cares at all for the boy, but because she wants to protect her rise to power. Empress Natalya rightfully points out that everyone still exists because House Carino defeated the thinking machines. Ultimately, I think the scene does a good job in establishing what it needs to, but I feel like the toy salamander is kind of dumb, and that all of House Richese so far lacks any actual character depth beyond just being unlikable. Javicco is a bit annoying in the scene with his continued submissiveness, which Desmond notices. Princess Ynez probably has the most amusing line when she threatens her new boy husband. Another thing to mention is Constantine and a member of House Richese, possibly the boy's older sister, keep flirting with one another. Also during the party, we get our first look at the Baron of House Harkonnen as he tries to convince the Emperor of the value of whale fur, which is House Harkonnen's major trade item. Valya's own family were whale fur traders, which I assume we will see later on. I don't really like the scene, which comes off a bit weird, but it gets the point across that House Harkonnen is actively trying to establish itself and is failing. After this, Valya stealthily sneaks out of the computer breeding index room and informs Tula that this match will indeed stabilize the Carino line for centuries. Valya considers removing Kasha from her post permanently and tells Tula to get her head straight. Back in the Sisterhood dormitories, the sisters comment on how after all their hard work to reach acolyte status, Princess Ynez will stroll right in and skip to that rank. We then transition to Ynez and Constantine having one final night out, riding in one of those fancy residential hover vehicles we saw in the trailer. They partake in some form of party drug, which they snort, and I assume it must be a form of spice because it has a bluish tint to it, and that would be lore accurate. Ynez informs her brother that they are going to the Division, which I can only assume is either a prestigious club, a shady club, or possibly both. Next, Desmond Hart has a much-needed heart-to-heart with Javicco Carino. Desmond confirms that the fleet of fighters he receives from Richese will be enough to solve Arrakis' problems. However, Desmond warns Javicco that it will do nothing for the growing insurgency in the Imperium, hinting at the Sisterhood. As Desmond explains further, Javicco appears to be much more receptive to it coming from Desmond opposed to his wife. Desmond explains information that has been withheld from the Emperor on how more and more people feel they were too quick in discarding the thinking machines, and that the people wonder why only the great houses gain riches from spice harvesting. Desmond asks if the Emperor believes in forces beyond man and machine, and claims that he should not have survived the abyss, or as we soon find out, the insides of a sandworm. Interestingly, Desmond reveals that on the other side of the abyss, he no longer feels fear and is a changed man. Based on his abilities, I think he means literally. Desmond goes on to talk about how the gods are listening, and then Javicco says something interesting, which Desmond then acts upon. Javicco says that he would be a true believer if somehow he was saved from this accursed wedding. Ynez arrives at the Division with Constantine. Ynez procures a type of drug, which she then convinces Kieran to take with her. This is our first look at Michaela the Fremen, who is the bartender, and has the telltale blue within blue eyes. Michaela gives Kieran a disapproving look as Ynez leads him away. I'm not sure what the history is between Michaela and Kieran, but whatever it is isn't enough to stop Kieran from physically enjoying himself with the princess in a private room, since this is her last night on the planet after all. The liquefied drug they inhale from the device is very blue, so once again a form of the spice drug from Arrakis. We transition back to the Sisterhood dormitories and learn that Lila, the empath, can tell that Sister Jin's backstory was a lie laced in truth. We get the reveal that the Sisterhood hides the lineage of their initiate's parents, in that Lila was raised at the Sisterhood. And Jin says that one way or another, our past always finds us. Basically just foreshadowing that we will find out who Lila's parents are, and that it must be a bit of a reveal to set it up like this. The Emperor awakens from a possible nightmare and heads to his hologram room, where he finds Desmond Hart left him a device which, upon inserting into his hologram machine, shows him what actually happened with Desmond. The hologram shows Desmond in a stillsuit standing up near the Harvester wreckage with thumpers going off around him, calling a worm and being consumed by it. And we know, surviving it somehow. While this is going on, we see Desmond in the present using his mysterious ability to burn the Rechese boy alive, which simultaneously causes Kasha to burn alive on an entirely different planet, which, as I mentioned earlier, might have been because of the eye contact he made with her. Before Desmond kills the boy, he has a great bit of dialogue where he likens what the Sisterhood is doing now with manipulation to human enslavement by machines. He says how it is so troubling that humans are being controlled again so soon after the machine wars ended. When Valya witnesses Kasha burning alive, the episode ends with her saying, "I see, Mother," referring to the old Mother Superior Raquella's prophetic words 30 years prior, when she said how Valya will see the burning truth and know. Alright, so now having seen the episode twice, I want to quickly share my overall opinion of the premiere. My initial number rating that comes to mind is a 7. I feel that the premiere did a good job setting up intrigue, establishing the world and characters. I like a fair amount of what they're doing with the lore. They're towing an interesting line in which they are creating something new while remaining at least somewhat faithful, so far at least, to what happened in Brian Herbert's books, while also trying to pay homage and possibly set up the prophecy that is in place in Frank Herbert's books. In addition to this, they are trying to maintain a visual through line to the vision Denis Villeneuve has established in his movie adaptations. I will admit that that is a lot for one show to deal with, so hopefully they don't mess it up. As for the characters, I'm definitely intrigued by Desmond Hart, but if they don't have a very good explanation for what's going on, then I may not like it. Right now though, I'm invested and I feel that whatever is going on with this character is somehow machine related. Mostly because, aside from the original Russak witches who had telekinetic powers, the Dune universe doesn't have any magic-like stuff going on. Although I haven't read all of Brian Herbert's books, so who knows. I like both interpretations of Valya and Tula so far, and they seem pretty accurate to their book counterparts. Although, believe me or not, Valya actually seems less power-hungry in this show. Princess Ynez, I think, is my favorite of the new characters just because her plotline has a lot of potential, and I feel like she got the most screen time so far. Honestly, I'm not really invested in any of the acolytes of the school yet. A lot of them just seem kind of weird, but it's too early to tell. Right now, Kieran Atreides is a bit of a nothing character, and aside from banging the princess, he hasn't really done anything yet. Javicco plays his part well, but his emasculation by the Sisterhood feels the most heavy-handed and possibly out of character from where the books left off with his father. The Recheses, as I've mentioned, are kind of bleh right now, and Constantine seems just okay. I am very interested in how Michaela the Fremen is going to tie into this story. Overall, I'm impressed with the quality of the set design and VFX thus far, and I'm hopeful for the show as a whole. I quite like a lot of the dialogue I'm seeing from the script, but I'm a bit concerned about the big picture stuff. So far, I do appreciate that actual effort went into understanding the lore, which with these shows doesn't usually happen at all. That all being said, I have heard rumors from early reviews that this episode is the strongest of the 4 that were shown, which is a bit disheartening when the show will only be 6 episodes. Nevertheless, I will be back next week with another breakdown. Be sure to let me know in the comment section below how you felt about the show and if there's anything you want me to change going forward with these breakdowns. For more Dune related content, consider subscribing to the channel. Until next time.